Alexandra Arriaga of Amnesty International, what has your organization discovered about the treatment of Iraqi prisoners?
Well, Amnesty International has been in Iraq for the last year and a half. We've been looking at what the circumstances are there, and we've been looking at the human rights abuses that have been taking place in Iraq for the last several decades. Most recently, we've been very concerned about allegations of torture, ill treatment that have been coming out of Iraq based on what's been happening within the prison systems and other types of places where prisoners are in U.S. custody. And we've been, for quite some time, beginning in March of last year, been recording the types of allegations that have been coming through and raising them with the U.S. officials, asking for accountability to make sure that it's clear to the world that the U.S. will abide by the standards of human rights that we want our own to be treated as well. Mm-hmm.
And this was in March 2003 that you started getting reports?
That's right.
From whom?
A lot of it was coming from family members of those in Iraq and from a few who had been released. There was an excellent article that was done by Dana Priest of the Washington Post in December of 2002, and at that point she had quoted a number of U.S. officials that were basically suggesting that torture and ill treatment was being condoned within the U.S. government and within the Pentagon. So Amnesty International at that point met with officials at the White House and also the Pentagon to raise these concerns because we wanted to know, first of all, whether it was happening, and if it was, to hold people accountable to make sure that it doesn't happen. But also we thought it would be very important to make it clear to the world whether or not this is happening, because the perception was out there that the United States was torturing, and that is a very dangerous message to be sending to the rest of the world.
What's the response that you get from the White House and the Defense Department?
Well, we had a number of conversations with the White House and with the State Department and the Defense Department. And in all of those cases, we went back and forth about what the obligations are under U.S. law and the Convention Against Torture, which the U.S. ratified and has committed to uphold. And what we found was that the President then, on June 26th of last year, issued a statement. And the statement was very clear. It was a very welcome statement, and basically said that the United States opposes torture, that we condemn torture, that we would not torture, and that we would instruct our troops to make sure that they abide by U.S. law by not torturing and not conducting cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment. It's extremely important to make that, to send that message, and it was very important that the President articulated that, because those are the standards that the United States has pledged to uphold. And the United States, as the standard bearer for the world, needs to make it clear that torture is just unacceptable.
Where do you draw the line on torture? When you're looking for Osama bin Laden or looking for somebody who is threatening American troops, where is the line drawn?
Well, Amnesty International and the United States have said that torture is simply not acceptable. There are certain standards that exist.
Is torture any physical pain?
No, I mean, torture is very clearly defined, and it's defined in the treaty obligations. It's also in the U.S. Constitution that U.S. citizens aren't going to be subject to cruel and inhuman treatment, and and it's in the treaty obligations. But the point is that when these photographs came out, it was absolutely devastating because it confirmed to much of the world what their worst fears were. And it's very sad because we have an enormous number of extraordinary, courageous, excellent Americans who are out fighting right now, and they're fighting because they want to defend the freedoms they believe in so strongly. And to have these photos come out really sends a very dangerous message. It says that it has a devastating effect within the morale of the military. It has a devastating message worldwide about what is acceptable. For the United States to be perceived as torturing and now evidence of this kind of behavior, then the results of that are that we have the suggestion that the U.S. says it's okay. And when we have Americans around the world, that's a very dangerous message, because we certainly do not want Americans to be treated that way.
You've been investigating this since March 2003. Have you found systematic torture by U.S. troops?
What we have found is a number of stories that have come out from prisoners that were released, and some of them had marks on their bodies a month after they'd been released. They told of very difficult circumstances, of being hooded for long periods of time, of being held in physical positions that were painful for long periods of time, sleep deprivation and denial of medicine that was crucial. There have been some deaths in custody, and in all of these instances what we've asked for is to have investigations conducted and those that may be responsible to be held accountable. Now, especially, it's important not only that the President speak out against this behavior, and he has said that it is disgusting, that it is horrible, and that it is wrong, but also that it be made very clear that this is not the practice of the U.S. military. The way to do that is to have an investigation, a very thorough investigation, ideally an independent investigation, so that it has credibility for the rest of the world that now suspects the U.S. military, and that it be made public, those who are responsible, not just those who conducted this torture, but also what the climate of command is, and those at the highest levels that may be sending the message that this is okay. Those individuals have to be made accountable publicly for the rest of the world to know that that can't happen.
Before we go to calls, again, the definition of torture. You're in warfare, you want to get some information from somebody who may be an enemy to you. Sleep deprivation, not allowed?
Sleep deprivation, according to the United Nations and according to the U.S. as far as its relations with the United Nations, there are specific definitions. And under the UN definition, sleep deprivation under certain circumstances, if it's prolonged sleep deprivation, so that it truly hinders the individual and has a harmful effect on the individual. Denial of medicine, denial of food, in manners that are really treacherous. These do qualify as torture, as well as thumb screws, as well as electric prods, as well as other types of behavior that we would generally understand to be torture. Thank you very much for the question. I appreciate that. As a matter of fact, that is a very important issue, because increasingly what we're seeing is that private contractors are playing an important role in the conduct of U.S. military operations. And it's very murky as to what the rules are for them. Right now, when we have U.S. personnel abroad, they have to, of course, abide by U.S. law. And so, you know, they have very specific regulations when it comes to human rights conduct. And the military is a very rules-oriented organization, and so, you know, they do go to lengths to make sure that folks are trained and knowledgeable, although we would like to make sure that at the highest levels those messages are made very clear what the conduct needs to be. Now, increasingly what we have is private contractors that are conducting warfare, and they may be getting funding from the U.S. government, but it's very murky what the rules are that apply to them. And in this case specifically, what's happened is that it's not clear whether they've received any kind of training about what the limits are. So that really is an area that the Congress should take a look at, to make sure that whoever the U.S. government is funding is fully aware of U.S. law and complies, so that we don't have this kind of a problem. I appreciate the call, and I'd actually like to be very clear. Amnesty International is an equal opportunity criticizer. We actually get criticism from all sides because of the fact that we do criticize all governments. As a matter of fact, we have been quite critical of the attacks that have taken place in Israel by armed groups against civilians, and we've had a report that has come out about that issue specifically, and have had several press releases as the attacks have taken place. So you will find that we do criticize across the board. We've also been very critical of the kidnappings that have taken place and the horrific killings that have taken place against civilians in Iraq, Americans and other nationalities. And so there too you'll find, if you do go to our website at amnestyusa.org or amnesty.org, which is the London site, you'll find press releases on those very topics as well. But thank you very much. The point is that human rights abuses are wrong no matter who's committing them, whether it's government or armed groups. Thank you.
Thanks, caller.
Thank you very much for the question. Sadly, the types of abuse that we've seen is all too common around the world. That's why it's so important that it be condemned widely. And we want to make sure that we could hold other countries accountable, that we would be able to make sure that, that there's a common standard. You treat others as you want to be treated yourself. And so, that's why it's so important that the United States speak out against these kinds of abuses and that we hold accountable our own. We do find that that torture does happen in prisons around the world. We condemn it. The United States has condemned it in its annual State Department country reports on human rights practices. And even in the United States, when there have been abuse in prison systems here, there are investigations and there's publicity to make sure that it stops.
Where does Amnesty get its funding?
Amnesty International is entirely privately funded. We do not receive any government funds. We do receive some foundation grants, but it's primarily individuals that send in $20 to $40 a year, and then we have some individuals that are more generous and send in some larger funds. But it's entirely privately funded by individuals in the United States, and it's an organization that has offices worldwide. So in every country there are individuals that give to the cause of human rights. Thank you. Amnesty International has looked at the situation in the United States just as we do at the situation in Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Colombia, China, just to give you different examples. And in the United States we have a number of reports about conditions in the prison systems and have been very critical of certain kinds of procedures that are used. We've been looking into the use of taser equipment, for example, and where that has been used in a very dangerous way, but also where prison personnel have just been completely out of line. And there too, you'll find a number of reports on our website, and you'll also see that we have been trying to work state by state to try to improve the prison systems.
Prior to this war, were you critical of Saddam Hussein?
Absolutely. I mean, Amnesty International has a number of reports on Iraq, and the types of crimes that were taking place were horrific. We've been asking for the international community to hold Saddam Hussein accountable for the human rights abuses that he's committed. But we're talking about, widespread torture, rape, executions, complete denial of rights, of religious rights, of expression, of political rights, a complete crackdown on the population. And so, it's important that he be held accountable for his crimes. That's also why it's so important now for the Iraqi population to see that the pictures that have come out, that those crimes of the abuse in the prisons also, that those responsible be held accountable. Because sadly and ironically, the detention center where this took place was one of the most notorious in Iraq for torture. And so to the average Iraqi, they just feel as though nothing has really changed. It fulfills their worst fears. And it's important if the United States is trying to set a standard for rule of law and respect of human rights in the future, that it make it clear that abuse is just intolerable. Thank you, caller. I appreciate you raising that. Amnesty International does have some reports on Iran as well, where not only do you have general political repression, horrible conditions in the prisons, and many individuals that are currently in detention, but you also have religious repression as well, and a persecution against the Baha'i community, the Jewish community, and others. But generally speaking, it is still a country that needs to come a long way on human rights. I encourage you to go to our website at amnestyusa.org. Thank you.
Alex Arriaga of Amnesty, we're going to have to leave it at that.
Okay.
Thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you.